The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation is hosting a dialogue focusing on women's representation and participation in decision-making and conflict management. It's set to explore how women can meaningfully influence a new global discourse on peace and security. Professor Cheryl Hendriks is the Executive Director at the Institute and joins me now for more. Professor Hendriks, good morning to you and thank you very much for your time. You know what's so interesting is that when you think about a lot of the research in this particular area, and there is plenty actually, women's participation increases the probability of peace agreements lasting 15 years by 35%. We'll talk more about why that representation isn't there and what impact it could have on often, where safety and security affects women directly. But what is it that women bring to the table that makes the difference?
Thank you, Iman. So firstly, the conference that we are having, we're co-hosting with IDEA next week, and it's dealing with women's political participation and the participation in peace and security. So this has been an agenda since Beijing 1995. We moving on to 24 years this year of the implementation of UN Security Council 1325 for women's participation in peace processes. And no, we haven't moved much on the agenda at all. So the statistics you're quoting that if women participate, it will increase the probability of peace processes being more sustainable is one that says women constitute 50% of these conflict countries. Their interests, their needs need to be taken into account first and foremost. Secondly, when they are there, they are looking at the broader society as well. And ensuring that everybody's needs and interests, at least this is the perception that these will be reflected, as opposed to just the power politics that get played out at these peace processes. What we actually arguing is not that women's participation makes peace processes more sustainable. We're saying that it's their right to participate first and foremost. And we're saying that when you include more people, a diverse sector of your society, then you're likely to get a far better outcome for that society. Peace is not what is obtained by merely signing a peace agreement. It is what happens in the communities. It is what happens in the families. And so for peace to be sustainable, and this is the actual argument, they have to be rooted. So we have to bring the people who are peace builders in their communities, etc., to the table, and those are more likely to be women.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
That's where the argument is coming from, because we can't make a simplistic argument that women just sitting at the table will bring peace. There are other dynamics there that are at play.
And as you say, Professor Hendriks, anything without the people of, the group of people who is affected is going to be ineffective, because you're not bringing their experiences in, you're not bringing the understanding that they have of the dynamics of the place, for example. So, you're going in with an incomplete strategy. Just to go deeper on the point that you've just made now, Professor Hendriks, and it's countries with greater gender equality are most likely to resolve conflict without violence, less likely to use military force to settle and resolve disputes. You touched a little bit on what it is that's preventing women from being in those spaces, given, and I fully accept what you're saying, a lot of nuance and detail. You can't just say if they're not there, or if they're there, that, peace processes have a better chance of survival. It's a lot more nuanced than that. But what is keeping women away when you can see the benefits on paper?
Exactly it. Obviously, there's a political will in terms of developing the frameworks, because we have a plethora of frameworks saying that women need to be part of peace processes. But in reality, they are under 13%. So where is the gap? At first, people said the gap was training, and so there was a number of, and there still are, a number of capacity building initiatives that have happened. But it's not just training. It is around political will to have women there, because you can simply say for mediation, for example, that mediation processes need to be co-led, both a male mediator and a female mediator, and immediately we will up the numbers game already, and that women can be part of the support teams of mediation processes. So not just looking at negotiators and mediators, but also those larger support teams. And so how do we begin training women on DDR, on security sector reform, disarmament, etc., how to draft a peace agreement? So our training needs to be broadened, deepened, etc. And I think that is what we are focusing now on. But secondly, mediators, they are appointed by the chairperson of the African Union or the UN, and they also have to be acceptable to those factions who are warring at the table. And so that always becomes also a difficult component for women. So much more deliberate effort needs to be made in that regard. Secondly, thirdly, it is around not just mediation processes, but conflict prevention. And here I think women can play a much bigger role in being part of peace processes in relation to conflict prevention, because that happens at community level. Early warning systems, being part of fact-finding missions, for example. There, I think organizations such as the African Union, SADC, etc., can be more deliberate in employing women to be part of the fact-finding missions. We are deploying, for example, for our national elections here, 300 women who will be trained in conflict prevention and mediation, so that we can have a peaceful election, and so that women in South Africa can be part of those ensuring those peace processes. And so that's what I mean by deliberate effort. If you want to make this happen, if you want to have more women as part of peace processes, you have to create the structures, the platforms, etc., for that to happen, as well as push our male counterparts to actually move from political will in terms of signing the declarations, etc., to political will in action, bring women on board. This is not a panacea for our conflicts. Make no mistake about this. We cannot argue that if more women are included, we won't have conflicts, because the conflicts stem from a number of other conditions as well, from governance issues, from corruption issues, from small arms and light weapons being available, etc. So there are other issues. But our start, if we want to talk about gender equality, our start is inclusion. And the point that we want to get to, it's not just about inclusion, Imam. It's about transformation, right? Because we argue that we want to be included to transform those structures so that they can be more responsive, yes, to the needs of women, but to the needs of everybody in society. So Professor, I always make the argument that you cannot have peace and security just for women. It has to be for a broader society, but concentrating on women is also ensuring that it will be there for a broader society.
Professor Cheryl Hendriks, thank you very much for sharing a little bit more on the critical conversations on women, peace and security in Africa. Professor Cheryl Hendriks is Executive Director at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation.